I was a nurse at St. Jude's for 6 years, but when I walked into the isolation wing at 4:15 a.m. and saw a man who was officially dead suddenly take a breath, I realized I wasn't working in a hospital anymore. I was working in a crime scene. I had no idea that simply reporting what I saw would force me to go on the run from a shadow network prepared to give me a permanent erasure to keep their secrets buried. The sterile scent of the intensive care unit usually brought me a strange sense of comfort. It was a place of absolutes, heartbeats, vitals, and the unwavering fight for survival. I had been a nurse at St. Jude's for 6 years, and I prided myself on being the one who noticed the details everyone else ignored. But that Tuesday, the details didn't just stand out, they screamed. It was 4:15 a.m., the hour when the hospital feels most like a graveyard. I was performing my routine rounds in the isolation wing, where we kept the patients who were supposedly beyond reach. Bed 12, a man in his 50s brought in 2 days ago after a massive cardiac incident, had been declared deceased by Dr. Aris late yesterday evening. His paperwork was sitting in the station, stamped and ready for the morgue pickup at dawn. I walked past the drawn curtains, my footsteps echoing faintly on the linoleum. I don't know what compelled me to stop. Perhaps it was a flicker of movement, a tiny, rhythmic twitch under the heavy, pale blue sheet. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the fabric. This was a man whose end had already been documented, verified, and signed off by the highest authority in the building. To question it was professional suicide, but to ignore it felt like murder. I pulled the curtain back. He was cold, his skin the color of wet parchment, but his chest, ever so slightly, was rising. I didn't reach for a stethoscope. I reached for his wrist. There was a pulse. It was faint, thready, like a butterfly trapped in a jar, but it was there. My hands began to tremble. Why was he being left here, cold and isolated, if there was even a shred of life left? I looked at the monitor. It was turned off, a deliberate act that made my blood run ice cold. I rushed to the head nurse's station, my mind racing through protocols and ethical nightmares. I found Dr. Aris in his office, his face illuminated by the soft blue glow of his computer screen. He didn't look up as I burst in, his voice calm, bordering on cold. "Nurse, you're off duty in an hour. Why aren't you finishing your logs?" "Doctor," I stammered, my voice sounding shrill in the quiet office. "Bed 12. He's alive." I checked. He's breathing, and there's a pulse. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dr. Aris finally leaned back, his swivel chair creaking in the stillness. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look concerned. He looked annoyed. He looked at me the way one might look at a stubborn pest that refused to be swatted. "You are exhausted, and your judgment is clouded," he said, his tone icy. "That patient was declared terminal. The family has been notified. The death certificate is ready. To suggest otherwise is not just an error. It is a dangerous disruption to the hospital's operation." "But he is a human being," I shouted, the sound dying quickly against the soundproof walls. "If he's alive, we have to intervene. We have to call the code team." Dr. Aris stood up slowly, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the floor. He walked toward me, and for the first time in 6 years, I felt genuinely afraid of him. He leaned in, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "You think you're a hero, don't you? You think you've uncovered some grand injustice, but you have no idea what you're meddling in. There are larger things at play in this ward than one patient's struggle. Go home. Forget you ever saw that bed, or you will regret the day you ever set foot in this building." I backed away, my keys clutched in my hand, my heart breaking for the man in the isolation room. I didn't go home. Instead, I snuck back to the wing, determined to bypass the doctor and alert the night supervisor. I pushed the door to the isolation room open, ready to fight for a life that everyone else seemed so desperate to discard. But when I reached for the sheet, the bed was empty. Not just empty, the sheets were stripped, the mattress was bare, and the floor was damp with a dark, metallic-smelling residue. Standing in the center of the room was a man I'd never seen before, dressed in a dark suit holding a folder that bore my name. He looked at me and smiled, holding up his phone. On the screen, a live feed showed my own front door being forced open by men who definitely weren't police. The man in the suit didn't move toward me. He didn't have to. The chilling reality of what I was witnessing rooted me to the spot. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket, a text notification from my sister who lived at my address. "They're here," she had typed, followed by a string of garbled characters. Then the screen went black. My heart was no longer racing. It felt like it had stopped entirely, replaced by a cold, leaden weight. "You really should have stayed in the cafeteria," the man said, his voice smooth and devoid of any human warmth. He gestured to the empty bed. The patient in bed 12 was never supposed to be a patient. He was a vessel for an organized scheme that relies on absolute silence. By alerting the chief, you didn't just break protocol. You threatened a multi-million-dollar operation that has deep roots within this foundation. I backed away until my shoulders hit the heavy, swinging doors of the ICU. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What did you do to him?" "He's been moved to a location where his, shall we say, status can be properly managed," the man replied. He took a slow step forward, checking his watch. "But that is the least of your concerns, nurse. By attempting to interfere, you've crossed into territory that attracts a much more aggressive response. The service of the law won't protect you here. We aren't talking about a simple medical malpractice suit. We are talking about a permanent erasure." Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered and died, plunging the entire floor into a suffocating emergency red gloom. I heard the distinct click-clack of heavy boots on the linoleum coming from the stairwell. It wasn't the sound of the security guards I knew. These footsteps were disciplined, rhythmic, and cold. I realized then that Dr. Aris wasn't just a doctor. He was a gatekeeper for something far more sinister. I bolted. I didn't head for the elevator. That would be a death trap. I scrambled toward the service exit, my lungs burning. Behind me, the man in the suit began to laugh, a soft, mocking sound that echoed off the tiles. "You think you can run from a network that monitors every breath in this city? You're already labeled as an accessory to a felony. By tomorrow, your records will show that you were the one diverting supplies to facilitate a trafficking ring. You'll be the face of the scandal, while we simply move on to the next ward." I burst into the stairwell, my pulse drumming in my ears. I scrambled down the metal stairs, taking them two at a time. I needed to get to the internal audit office. If I could get my hands on the digital logs from the night shift, I could prove the patient had been admitted under a false identity. I had to expose them before they could paint me as the villain. I reached the basement level, panting, my scrubs soaked in cold sweat. The silence of the basement was heavy, smelling of chemicals and old paper. I crept toward the back office, the one place that held the master server. I had the override key from my mentor, who had passed away under mysterious circumstances just 3 months ago. Maybe this was why she had given it to me. I jammed the key into the lock, and the door creaked open. I dove toward the computer terminal, my fingers flying across the keys. The screen glowed, illuminating my terrified face. I bypassed the first firewall, then the second. I was in. I began downloading the admission logs, the patient transit history, and the encrypted messages Dr. Aris had been sending to an offshore server. Looking for a way out or a way to bury yourself deeper? I froze. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, blinding me. I squinted, shielding my eyes, and saw the silhouette of someone standing in the doorway. It was the night supervisor, a woman I had trusted for years. She held a heavy metallic object in her hand, not a weapon, but a badge. No, not a badge, a file. "You don't understand," she said, her voice dripping with pity. "I didn't want it to come to this, but you've seen the file, haven't you? The one that links the hospital's funding to the distribution of those forbidden packages. Once you've opened that folder, there's no turning back." She stepped into the light, and I saw she was holding a syringe. "I have orders to ensure you don't make it to the police. They've already prepared an accusation of grand larceny against you. If I don't stop you, they'll stop both of us." Just as she lunged, the computer screen behind me flashed a warning. "Remote access detected. IP traced." The room suddenly filled with the sound of sirens, but they weren't coming from outside. They were coming from the hospital's own internal alert system. The exit door slammed shut, and the magnetic locks engaged with a final, echoing thud. I was trapped, and from the sound of heavy equipment being dragged across the floor outside, they were preparing to seal the basement for good. The syringe glinted under the harsh flicker of the dying fluorescent bulb. The supervisor, a woman whose office door I had opened for cake and coffee only weeks prior, looked genuinely haunted. She wasn't a monster. She was a cog in a machine that had clearly terrified her into submission. But I didn't have time for pity. As she lunged, I shoved the heavy rolling chair into her path, sending her sprawling against the steel server cabinets. "Don't do this," I screamed, scrambling toward the maintenance tunnel I'd spotted on the floor plan during my orientation. "They're going to erase you too. You're just a liability to them." She groaned, struggling to sit up, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and realization. "You don't understand. They have everything on me. They have my family, my records. There is no exit." I didn't stop to argue. I kicked open the ventilation grate behind the main server unit and crawled into the narrow, dust-choked space. Behind me, I heard the basement door explode inward, not with a key, but with the heavy, splintering sound of forced entry. Men in tactical gear, not hospital security, poured into the room. They weren't there to arrest me. They were there to sanitize the crime scene. I crawled through the cramped darkness, the sharp edges of the ductwork tearing at my uniform, until I saw the faint, golden light of the loading dock. I dropped down, landing on a pile of cardboard, and sprinted into the freezing night air. I didn't head home. I knew they'd be waiting there. Instead, I ran toward the one place they wouldn't expect, the local precinct of the Internal Affairs Division, a department known for its brutal, uncompromising approach to rooting out corruption in the city's institutions. I reached the glass doors, my face bruised, my clothes shredded. The officer at the desk looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to alarm as he saw the state I was in. I didn't say a word. I simply slammed a small, encrypted USB drive onto the desk, the one I had managed to pull from the server, just as the remote access hit. "I have proof!" I gasped, collapsing into a chair as the adrenaline finally abandoned me. "They're running a network through the hospital, trafficking, falsified death certificates, and the distribution of forbidden substances." They're using the morgue as a logistics hub. The next 48 hours were a blur of interrogation rooms and white noise silence. I was placed in protective custody while the internal audit team tore St. Jude's apart. They found everything. The patient in bed 12 wasn't just a man. He was a key witness in a federal case involving an organized scheme that had been using the hospital as a front for years. Dr. Aris and his associates hadn't just been running a medical facility, they had been operating an illicit distribution point for illegal cargo, utilizing the cover of terminal patients to bypass police checkpoints. When the dust finally settled, the news broke across every headline in the city. The hospital was shuttered, and the network, a massive, sprawling web of doctors, local officials, and corporate enablers, was dismantled in a series of coordinated raids. Dr. Aris and his partners received a massive sentence, dozens of years behind bars for their roles in the conspiracy. They had tried to frame me with an accusation of grand larceny and a desperate attempt to break my life with a heavy criminal charge. But the digital trail I had secured proved the entire narrative was a fabrication. I never went back to nursing. The trauma of that night, of seeing how easily a life could be declared over for the sake of profit, changed me forever. I moved to a different state, kept a low profile, and found peace in a quiet, mundane life away from the city. But sometimes, when I walk past a hospital, I still feel that phantom chill. I know now that the most dangerous things aren't always found in the shadows. They're often hidden behind the bright, sterile lights of a place you're supposed to trust. I kept a single souvenir, a newspaper clipping of the hospital's condemnation. Every time I look at it, I remind myself that one person, acting on a single stubborn conviction that life matters, can stop even the most powerful machine. I didn't save the man in bed 12. He'd been moved long before I reached the server. But the investigation later confirmed he was alive when they found him, safely extracted from the network by the authorities I'd alerted. He survived to testify, and for that the sleepless nights were worth it. I am the nurse who saw the truth, and I am the one who lived to tell it.